No te pierdas las actividades del 13º Congreso de Investigación y Práctica Profesional. Suscríbete al canal de la Facultad de Psicología de la Universidad de Buenos Aires y activa las notificaciones.
Bueno, es un gusto presentar a las autoridades del Congreso y a todos los participantes. Es realmente un gusto contar con la posibilidad de una conferencia del doctor Barry Duncan. Barry es CEO de Better Outcomes Now y creador de un sistema de gestión de resultados que asocia a terapeutas y pacientes para la evaluación continua del proceso terapéutico. Este es un trabajo de gran importancia llevado adelante durante muchos años. PCOMS, como se lo llama, Partners for Change Outcome Management System, PCOMS es la sigla, es un conjunto instrumental que combina desarrollos de investigación científica, desarrollos tecnológicos, y lo combina con la expertise clínica. La idea es, mediante un procedimiento basado en la evidencia, evaluar procesos terapéuticos y favorecer el incremento de la eficacia terapéutica en los tratamientos psicológicos. A lo largo del tiempo, y mediante investigación, PCOMS tiene el respaldo actualmente de 7 ensayos clínicos aleatorizados. Así tiene el reconocimiento de la APA como un procedimiento válido para evaluación de tratamientos. La ventaja del procedimiento es que realiza una evaluación cualitativa, pero cuantificable. Y sobre todo permite también evaluar la efectividad del personal que trabaja en los sistemas de salud mental, tanto sean públicos como privados. Esta conferencia que nos va a brindar el profesor Barry Duncan se refiere a la utilidad, y por eso tiene una gran actualidad, se refiere a la utilidad que el procedimiento tiene en un periodo como el que estamos atravesando de pandemia. Él nos va a proporcionar una descripción general de la práctica de PCOMS y sus aplicaciones durante la pandemia mundial de COVID. De alguna manera, el procedimiento favorece y crea una serie de ventajas relacionadas con todo lo que se llama telesalud. PCOMS permite una evaluación continua del trabajo mediante telesalud, pero también detectar en forma, digamos, priorizar sobre todo y clasificar aquellos consultantes al servicio que podrían necesitar algún tipo de seguimiento a través de internet o a través de teléfono, porque sus niveles de ansiedad son muy altos o sus urgencias son muy altas. O sea, permite una captación rápida de aquellas personas que están en una situación de urgencia. Todo esto es algo que se ha venido desarrollando y comprobando a través digamos, del seguimiento que ha hecho el doctor Barry Duncan sobre la utilización de esto en el periodo de pandemia. Algo que quiero remarcar también, que ahora va a hablar algo de esto la doctora Wittner, es que este procedimiento, la Fundación IGB, la Fundación Bateson de Argentina, ha adquirido la licencia para trabajar y a través de nuestros efectores estamos utilizando este procedimiento y nos permite encontrar, digamos, una forma de aplicación de cómo evaluar procesos terapéuticos en nuestro medio. Estamos haciendo toda la experiencia de aplicación a una cultura diferente, a una situación diferente, y esto nos permite, bueno, también la utilización para la docencia. Así que ahora Valeria Wittner va a hablar un poquito de esto. Adelante,
bueno,
Valeria.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Gracias, Martín. Bueno, mi nombre es Valeria Wittner. Soy la profesora que está a cargo de Clínica Sistémica y coordinadora académica de la carrera de especialización. Esto es, digamos, pertinente mencionarlo en este contexto porque, digamos, lo que tratamos de hacer y la aplicación y la utilidad que nosotros le estamos encontrando a PCOMS es poder, además de controlar el funcionamiento de los procesos terapéuticos, poder entrenar terapeutas y poder darle a los terapeutas un soporte clínico que les brinda confianza, que les brinda tranquilidad a la hora de atender y que permite ajustar expectativas de los pacientes y con el trabajo del terapeuta. Así que bueno, estamos muy contentos, estamos muy agradecidos de que Barry esté acá con nosotros y compartiendo. La verdad que ya hace bastante tiempo estamos trabajando en conjunto y bueno, estamos muy agradecidos también, así que bueno, lo escuchamos a él, que estamos todos ansiosos por eso. Así que bueno, muchas gracias.
Hello and welcome to the presentation. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I am greatly honored to be talking to you today about things that I'm quite passionate about, and certainly applying these ideas during this global pandemic that we are all facing that has changed the face of psychotherapy practice forever and always. We'll talk about that a bit more. Let me start the PowerPoint presentation. And of course, that's what we're going to talk about, how we can maintain very high quality standards when we're delivering services in quite different ways, either by telephone or by the internet. And hopefully someday we will be able to have more face-to-face, but in the interim, and I think that it will always be this way now, that we'll always be doing a hybrid where we see some people individually face-to-face, but we'll see many people via other means like telephone or internet. I want to call your attention to the website, betteroutcomesnow.com. There's 250 free resources on this website, and many of them are translated to Spanish. So feel free to check that out and download all the free stuff. So here we are. I want to kind of weave in a couple of different topics here about in this era of the pandemic that we all are within now. And that is, how do we maintain quality standards? How do we ourselves as practitioners continue to get better in the face of all these new stressors that we have, dealing with not only our clients who are under much stress and duress, but we ourselves under that same stress and duress. So how is this kind of getting better and PCOMS and measuring outcomes relevant to COVID and the pandemic? Well, it offers us some very nice, quick, and easy ways to know how people are doing during the pandemic. It measures in a quite rapid way the stress levels that people are under now. And so it's a way to keep in contact, to increase engagement, and also to triage how much distress people are actually in. We'll talk about that more in detail. And as I mentioned, this kind of way of delivering services is here to stay. It's never going to go back to the way it was before. It's never going to go back to where you only see people face to face. I think those days are long gone, not only because of this pandemic, but I think it's safe to say that there will be others that will happen in the not too distant future. Not trying to sound gloom and doom here, but I think that people will be more cautious about going out in the world now and will prefer services to remain via telephonic or telehealth. So, this is going to be the new normal. So given this, two questions I would ask, given this is the new normal. First of all, how do we know that our pandemic services are even helping people? That's an important question. And also then, how do we get better as practitioners? So that is what today is about. To do that, though, I need to talk to you about how you think that you improve your services, how you think you can improve yourself as a practitioner, but also I need to introduce you to what Valeria and Martín were talking about, the Partners for Change Outcome Management System, or PCOMS. There we go. To get us kind of warmed up in this, I wanted to go through this little pop quiz with you about how we actually get better. So my first question to you, and these are simple true or false questions, and you think about the answer in your head as we go through. So how about this one? Finding the right approach or selecting evidence-based treatments improves outcomes. How about that? Is that true or false? What do you think?
Not.
Actually, it's false, because all treatments are the right treatment for a given individual. If there was a right treatment, we would already all be doing it and all of our clients would benefit, but we know that's not the case. And actually, studies show that no one approach has reliably shown better outcomes than any other. Of course, that's called the dodo bird verdict. So how about this one?
Now for something completely different.
Personal therapy and increasing our self-awareness makes us a better person and improves our outcomes. What do you think? Is personal therapy going to make you a better therapist? True or false?
Missed it by that much.
No, that's false too. In studies of therapists who have had therapy versus therapists who have hadn't, there's no difference in their effectiveness. That doesn't mean that our personal therapy isn't helpful to us, but there's never any research that's been shown that it actually improves our outcomes. Researchers have a long time wanted to show that self-awareness and personal insight, it would make us a better person and therefore a better therapist and get better outcomes. But they've really tried to show that, but it's not been able to be demonstrated. In fact, you can be blandly insightless and still be a good therapist, and I think I might be proof positive of that. How about this one? The accrued wisdom of clinical experience, years of seasoning improves outcomes. What do you think about that one? I know that one of the things I was told early on, Barry, just get experience, and that will help you get better outcomes over the course of your career. So what do you think? Is that true or false? Well, the cold, hard reality is that if you compare beginning level therapists and experienced therapists on aggregate, there's no difference in their effectiveness. Many studies have shown that. Now, why is that even possible? Well, think about it. You know, just logging years of experience, unless you learn something from that experience, does you no good. Because you could have 17 years of experience and have the same year of experience 17 times. So, you know, it's not really going to help you if that's the case. You have to learn from the experience. You have to actually change what you do with your clients. Or not. What about this one? This has become, you know, quite popular lately, and that is deliberate practice. Deliberate practice hones therapy skills and therefore improves our outcomes. What do you think about that one? Is that true or false? Have you heard about deliberate practice? I can't go on my Facebook page without seeing somebody talking about it. So it's really around here in the US for sure.
What are you people? On dope?
Actually, you know, and I hate to say this, but it is the latest fad that's marketed by snake oil salesmen. I don't know if that translates well to Spanish, but people who go around selling, you know, the next fad in fashion, that there's really not much substance to it. It's never been shown to improve psychotherapy outcomes if therapists practice this deliberate practice method. And why is that? You know, the basic idea is that you practice the skills of psychotherapy deliberately over time and it will improve your effectiveness. Well, it's very reductionistic and it's at best applicable to the things you learned in your first counseling classes, like empathic listening or active listening, those kinds of things. It may be helpful in that context, but it downplays the complexity of psychotherapy. The psychotherapy is quite a unique process. It's idiosyncratic to the people involved, and it's relationally unique. So you can't apply skills practiced like multiplication tables or learning different words in a different language. It's not that kind of a thing. It's an in-the-moment process defined more by not knowing what's going to happen next than skills practiced like multiplication tables. It's dynamic and interactive and relationally and culturally unique, right? It's a far different endeavor than shooting a basketball or playing the piano. And that's where this idea of deliberate practice comes from. So how do we get better? You get better by first measuring your outcomes and knowing how effective you truly are. And that's what I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about now, the Partners for Change outcome management system. And then we'll fold that in to practicing in the era of COVID. So what is PCOMS? You know, our field always comes up with a lot of different names for the same thing, and they've done this with client feedback as well. I started out nearly 20 years ago calling this systematic client feedback, but it's now called by routine outcome monitoring, or ROM, measurement-based care, or MBC, or progress monitoring, or PM. Those are the ways it's often identified. But what PCOMS is, it's a systematic client feedback system that uses these 2 4-item scales. That's right, just 4 items that measure the client's experience of benefit during therapy and their experience of the therapy itself, or the therapeutic alliance, in other words. So it's for any service that intends to privilege the client's view of therapy and that wants to form a strong therapeutic relationship. So that's what PCOMS is. That's what measurement-based care is. Now, what it does for us, it provides this unambiguous data. It identifies those clients who are not benefiting so we can do something different. The beauty of that is that when we do something different with clients that aren't benefiting, we also grow in that process because we're doing things that we've never done before. It helps us get better at the individual therapist level to the organizational level, because once we know how effective we are, we can be more proactive about learning different things to help our clients. And of course, it helps us report our effectiveness to the people who are paying for the services, to prove to them that their money for funding our services is well spent. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it also can help you accelerate your development at an individual therapist level. So I like to kind of frame the discussion of why this is a good idea in the context of the good, the bad, and the ugly, which I think is pretty much a universal icon, those so-called spaghetti westerns of Clint Eastwood and the Italian directors, the good, bad, and the ugly. So the good news is we know that psychotherapy is effective. Study after study and studies of studies showing that the average treated person is doing better than 80% of the untreated sample. Of course, that doesn't mean we're 80% effective, or you wouldn't be needing to listen to this seminar today. It means that if we pull the average person out of the treated group, that they're doing better than 80% of this untreated group. Or in other words, therapy is 4 times better than no treatment at all, which is a great thing to be able to say about what we do. So what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is that those numbers typically do not include dropout rates or non-completers. And in the US, dropouts average about 47%, and even higher with substance abuse. That's what SA is there on this slide. So if you add that to the mix, if you add dropouts to how effective we really are, it's a hard rain that falls on how effective we are. And the other bit of bad news is that it depends on who you get as a provider on whether or not you're likely to benefit from therapy, because the provider accounts for a lot of the variance of change. In fact, the provider accounts for far more of the variance of change than what model or technique that the provider is actually using. Now, I want you to wrap your head around this idea because it's a very important to the discussion about measuring outcomes, and that is these therapist differences. And the study I like to cite as one. They separated the psychiatrists in the study in terms of their effectiveness. They separated the top third psychiatrists, the middle third psychiatrists, and the bottom third psychiatrists in terms of their level of effectiveness. And the clients of the top third effective psychiatrists getting sugar pills, getting placebo, got better outcomes than the bottom third giving the actual antidepressant. Now think about that for a second. Who was providing the pill, whether it was a sugar pill or not, mattered more than what was actually in the pill. If we do the same thing with therapists, we break them down in those three tiers or those three categories, we find that those top tier therapists, their clients drop out 50% less and change 50% more than the bottom tier therapists. So, gosh, you know, there's a pretty big difference among us as therapists in terms of our ability to secure positive outcomes with clients. And the ugly is that most of us don't really know how effective we actually are. Now, a lot of people do. There's 30,000 registered users of PCOMS on my website. A lot of people worldwide are starting to measure outcomes. There are several different approaches to measuring outcomes. There's only 2 of them that are evidence-based. PCOMS and Michael Lampert's OQ system are the only ones with randomized clinical trial support, but nevertheless, there are many out there. More and more are measuring outcomes, but still the majority of psychotherapists don't measure their outcomes and have no clue about how effective they really are. There are a couple of pretty funny studies about this, how therapists are really almost delusional in their belief about how effective they are. I'll just tell you about one here real quick. It was over 300 therapists, and that 90% of these therapists believed they were better than 75% of their colleagues, right? They were in the 75th percentile in effectiveness in their own minds. And if you remember anything about the bell curve, you know that just can't be true. We're not all above average. We're certainly not all in the 75th percentile. And I ask you, is that delusions of grandeur or just wishful thinking? Because if we're not measuring outcomes, we don't really know how effective we are, because we'll remember the people who we were effective with, and we won't remember those folks that drop out or who aren't benefiting from our service. Of course, it doesn't mean that we don't have brains. It means that the field hasn't given us a very easy way to monitor our effectiveness. So despite overall efficacy, dropouts are a problem. Not everybody benefits. Providers vary significantly in their ability to secure positive outcome, and most don't have a clue about how effective they really are. And of course, that's where PCOMS comes in. These 2 very, very brief measures, 4-item scales, one given at the beginning of the session, the other, that's the outcome scale, so it informs your session with whether or not the client's benefiting or not, and the other given toward the end, with enough time to discuss the therapeutic alliance so you can prevent the client from dropping out because they had a bad experience, so you can talk that through with them and prevent an early termination. So what PCOMS does is really quite simple, and it's not rocket science. In other words, it simply identifies those clients who aren't responding so you can discuss that with the client and figure out what else to do. That's simply what it does. If you know who the clients are in your caseload who aren't benefiting from you, you're going to be reflecting more. You're going to be talking to colleagues more. You're going to be thinking about trying different things that you've never done. So everybody benefits. The client benefits, and so do you in your development as a therapist. So the idea here is do that stuff you're good at. Do the models that you know how to apply that work for many in your practice until you get evidence from the client that it's not working for them. Then host a conversation about how you can do something different with them. And of course, the million-dollar question then is, does it actually improve outcomes when you do this process? And the answer is an unequivocal yes, it does. This is our first randomized clinical trial way back in 2009 that we did with couples in Norway. And, you know, I had no idea we'd get the effects that we got. It doubled overall outcomes. 4 times more couples achieved clinically significant change with PCOMS as those people who didn't have PCOMS a part of their treatment. And at follow-up, at 6-month follow-up, 46% less couples were separated or divorced in the PCOMS group rather than the TAU or treatment as usual group. So we had our first randomized clinical trial, came back with very, very strong effects, and that let us know we were really on to something. Now, the most recent one just published a couple of weeks ago. It was done in integrated care where, you know, therapists are embedded in primary care settings with physicians and provide therapy in that context. We found the same thing. It doubled overall outcomes. 43% more PCOMS clients achieved clinically significant change than the treatment as usual clients. And of course, also nearly 1/3 less dropouts in the PCOMS condition. This is the 9th randomized clinical trial of PCOMS. I think it's safe to say that it will improve your effectiveness if you do it. Michael Lambert did a meta-analysis of our studies, and he said essentially if you add PCOMS to your work, it'll increase your effect size by 0.40. Remember now that the average effect size for psychotherapy is 0.8. You add feedback to the mix and you're going to go to 1.20, which means you'll be a very effective therapist. And you actually will be above average, and not only in delusional thinking, but in actual effectiveness. Regarding therapist variability, remember I brought that up about this variation and effectiveness of different therapists. In our Norway trial, 9 of 10 of the therapists in the study got better outcomes with the PCOMS group. It raised the effectiveness of the people that were struggling the most to be more in line with their better outcome colleagues. So it really makes a lot of sense. It tends to level the performance of therapists in a very positive way. It raises the bar of all of our performance and allows us to improve the quality of care that's given to our clients. And by the way, the most striking thing about the therapists in this study was that a therapist in that low effectiveness group, you know, we separated them into 3 groups, the most effective, the middle effective, and the least effective. A therapist in the low effectiveness group without feedback became the best therapist in the study with feedback. So it can bring rather dramatic results, although, you know, it will definitely improve your outcomes. As you can see that 9 out of 10 did improve. So it tailors the service based on the client's response to your service. It provides this early warning system that allows you to know who's not benefiting so you can prevent dropout or a negative outcome. It tends to level out provider performance, and it's demonstrated that it improves performance now in 9 randomized clinical trials. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of it a little bit. I'm not going to, you know, get into that too much. If you're interested in PCOMS at a more detailed level, I would invite you to visit the website and look at the resources there that are translated to Spanish that talk about PCOMS and how to do it. But one thing to know right away about the outcome rating scale, there it is obviously in Spanish, is that it's not a list of symptoms. It's not, if you look at every other outcome measure on the planet, it's a list of everything that's wrong with people. It's about problems and symptoms and how often they have them. The ORS, the outcome rating scale, is different than that. That way it can be individualized to the client's own experience of what they want to get out of therapy. So it's the 4 broad domains of life that everybody has. It starts out as this general view of a client's distress, and then you hone in on it. It becomes to represent the individual's reasons for service as you unpack the client's story. Here is the measure. It's 4 10-centimeter scales. It comes out to a scale between 0 and 40 once the client puts a mark, and you add it with a centimeter ruler, or of course, the electronic system does that all for you. So you wind up with a score between 0 and 40. 25 is the so-called clinical cutoff. People who score under 25 tend to be people that are in the distress level that wind up talking to people like us. People who score over 25 tend to think their life is going okay. Here is the Spanish measure in Better Outcomes Now. And just let me give you a flavor of this. This is me introducing a client taking the outcome rating scale at the beginning of the session. So I introduce the measure. I make sure clients understand it's about them having a voice in the therapy and how we're going to monitor whether or not they're benefiting over the course of our treatment together. I'm also going to explain everything about the graph, about the clinical cutoff, because everything about PCOMS is transparent. And I'm going to start the session. And all this only takes 2.5 minutes.
This outcome rating scale is used for 2 reasons. One is to make sure, the main reason is that your viewpoint about things is very central to the way the work is done. Essentially, your viewpoint about whether or not you're benefiting from the therapy is kind of what drives the therapy. Because if you're not benefiting, then hopefully to figure out other things that can be done to help you benefit. So that's one of the main purposes. Your viewpoint is central. And the other thing is that if we monitor it together each and every time you come in, then when you're not doing well for whatever reason, we can put our heads together and figure out a different path to go. So that's the whole idea of the outcome rating scale. And this is just put a touch on where you see yourself in those major dimensions of your life, where this side meaning not going well and this side meaning going very well. So however you think about that. Yes. Please. Great. And it populates this. There we go. It populates this graph. And again, I'm not sure what's been explained to you, but the mauve part of this graph is people tend to score in that section when they're looking for a change in their life. And basically, they're looking for something different. And you are definitely scoring in that range. And actually, a person that scores that low is a person that's having a lot of distress in their life. Does that fit you? Yeah. Okay. People scoring in the green tend to be people that don't wind up talking to people like me. They're not looking for, their lives are okay, basically. Not great, but okay. And this bold green line here is really what we're hoping will happen for you in therapy. That's kind of what we hope that your graph will look like if your work in therapy is successful. So that's what that's all about. And you can see here, looks like you scored all of them just about equally low, not one lower than the rest. So what do you think would be the most useful thing for us to talk about today?
So that was the first session. In future sessions, she would just take the measure, which takes 20 to 30 seconds, and we would see whether or not she's improving or not. Notice how everything is transparent. Notice there's about 2.5 minutes. It's not very time intensive for you or the client. This was a very distressed young woman. She scored very, very low. She had just recently been date raped and got fired from her job and was struggling with maintaining her sobriety because she had been in recovery for a year. So she was very, very distressed. So that's the outcome side of things. Now, the alliance side of things is we have to consider the clients drop out of the service for 2 reasons. One is therapy is not helping them, and so why should they come back? That's why we monitor outcome. And 2, they drop out because of alliance problems. They're not really engaged or turned on by the therapy. So a direct way to keep people in treatment is to monitor and measure the alliance in each and every encounter. And we do that with the session rating scale, which there you can, by the way, download these for your personal use for free from the website in 32 different languages. And of course, Spanish is there. Here it is electronically in Better Outcomes Now. And here's what it looks like. Now, I leave the last 5 minutes of the session for the session rating scale, for the alliance measure. I do a take-home message, things that occur to me about the session. I ask oftentimes clients for their take-home message, and then I give the session rating scale and discuss that with them. Doesn't take a lot of time. You got to remember these are brief checking in processes. They're not meant to belabor or to browbeat the client. We really want to facilitate a culture of feedback where people will let us know that the therapy is going okay for them, or that we could do something to tweak it or make it better from their point of view. The more they're engaged in that conversation, the more they'll engage in the therapy, the more likely they are to benefit from the therapy.
You have an amazing lot of stuff going for you. You're incredibly resilient. I have great respect for people that overcome addiction. I've worked with a lot of people over the years, and I have great respect for what it takes, because I know what it takes for recovery to last, and that is to be able to deal with this really bad stuff you're dealing with now, and then not relapse because of it. So you have kind of, you're not, no one's all the way there, but you've figured out a lot of that stuff, and that you are using resources and you're not relapsing when you feel really bad. That's the perfect reason to use, and you're not doing that. So I'm very impressed with that. I'm also impressed with how you push through things. This fighter, you recognize the fighter within you. You know that power is there, and you push through sometimes. Now, not all the time, but you're wanting to push through more with that fighter part of you. And I like the way you're thinking about that. I think you're on the right track with that too. So I just wanted to say those things. I think that those things can continue to move forward with you. As rocky as I know now is for you, because I can just tell by how much distress you reflect on the ORS that it's a hard time for you now. But in those ways, though, there's a lot of good going for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So this other scale she has you do, the session rating scale, it is a way just to kind of take the temperature on our discussion today and how it went for you. And kind of the metaphor is, was it too hot or too cold? Do I need to adjust the thermostat to make you feel more comfortable? And when therapists and clients talk about this stuff, it tends to make the outcome come out better if we can just be real about this. And if there's something you like or don't like, that you let me know, you let Dolly know, so that they can alter what they're doing. Because unless they get that feedback, they'll never know.
Right.
Great, thank you. So it looks like it went pretty well?
Yeah.
Good. Anything in particular that you liked?
I kind of just liked that, that you're encouraging for me to kind of think outside the box about ways that, I can have the fighter come out more, and I don't know, just your approach, because to be honest, I was kind of I don't know what the fuck I'm about to walk into, because, and also just and no offense, but you're a man, and I'm not usually too comfortable talking so openly with a male doctor or therapist, but just your approach made me feel I was in a safe space, and that I could just kind of be open and vulnerable. So that that really helped me. It put me at ease.
Great. I'm really glad to hear that. Thanks for telling me that. I appreciate that.
So she said a lot of nice things to me, but keep in mind you're doing the session rating scale because you want to get feedback, and that's the whole intention. And you got to coax some clients for the feedback. It's not an easy thing to give therapists feedback, and so they have to know you're not going to use it against them. They have to know that there's not going to be negative consequences if they let you know that they don't like something. So it's a great indication of how much clients trust you when they do give you feedback. So just know at the get-go that clients tend to rate these measures very high. All Alliance measures are rated that way. So any feedback you can coax from a person, that's the goal of the SRS, is to coax feedback so you can better tailor your service to what the client's looking for. So after the first session, you only have two choices, right? Either the client's improving or they're not. If they're not improving, let's try to put our heads together with them and figure out what else we can do to help things get back on track. So when ORS scores are going up, like you see on the graph here, we really want clients to take responsibility for that. We want them to take some ownership for the change and see it as a consequence of their own efforts. I'm noticing that you had few instances where you had arguments with your partner, or you overcame the temptation to drink, or whatever it is. How were you able to accomplish that? What did you do? What were your thinking process? What did you act differently? You want clients to take some ownership. Clients are far more likely to repeat positive behaviors if they see it coming from their own volition rather than from an outside source. But the more important conversations you'll have is when the client isn't benefiting. And the longer the client goes without benefit, the more I'm going to increase kind of the urgency that we have to do something different. We got to talk about what we can do, implement different things, and maybe even ultimately, if no change comes from that, I will be talking about referral to a different clinician. Because remember, the clinician accounts for a lot of the variance of change, and changing out the clinician sometimes is the best intervention you have at your disposal. Here's what it may look like on the graph. You see that red line are the outcome rating scale scores, and this client is not benefiting, obviously, for now 6 encounters. This is an opportunity for us actually to be better, because it encourages us to do things we've never done, to try different things, different approaches, different ideas, to have different kinds of conversations with clients. So it's really quite useful to that process. I like to go through these kind of questions when I have a client that's not benefiting. First of all, the raison d'etre of PCOMS is to engage the client. What do they say about the lack of benefit? What are they thinking? I want to make sure they're not thinking it's about them. I want to make sure we keep it's about the approaches we're using. It's about our particular mix of uniqueness, our own individual chemistry with one another. It's about those things, not about the client. Is the client engaged? Do I have a good alliance with this client? If I know I don't, I should already move them on to somebody else. Hopefully we've done some things. What have we done? What else can we do? Have I exhausted my own repertoire? Is it time for me to think about moving the client on? What I like to call failing successfully. And that way we can help clients in 2 ways, either directly through our own work or by putting them in front of another therapist that will provide a mix of ideas to be helpful to the client. So that's PCOMS kind of in a quick summary. So let's talk about transferring those ideas and the benefits of doing this by telehealth or by telephone. We certainly don't want to compromise our quality of our services by stopping this, even though we're doing it in a totally different modality. We're doing it on the telephone, or we're doing it via Zoom or whatever platform, and having our conversations that way with clients. So remember that one of the things about PCOMS is we want to involve the client in all decisions that affect their care, and PCOMS really help us do that. Keeps us out of the kind of unilateral decision-making business. And I never really appreciated that perspective about psychotherapy. It's a collaborative relational process, not a unilateral decision process by the therapist. So, there are some advantages to telehealth. I know it might be hard to think of it that way, but gosh, there really are. First of all, there are very similar outcomes. We haven't lost effectiveness by going through telehealth. At first I was really worried about that it would be so different than face-to-face that it would not approximate the same process of psychotherapy. But I was glad to find that I was wrong about that, because the telehealth psychotherapy I've done. After we got going and over the initial awkwardness of it in the very beginning, it was just like doing psychotherapy face to face. I could, look at the client. I could see how they were reacting to things that I was saying, and we could have a fairly, approximated experience even through this venue. And if you're working with younger people, it's like life has never been different than this to them. So it's not a big change for them at all to do it this way. And in fact, I don't know the way it is where you are, but here in the US, there's all these companies that have kind of started up overnight about providing telehealth psychotherapy services. And a lot of millennials are taking advantage of that kind of venue. And so there's similar outcomes in face-to-face, but there are fewer cancellations and no-shows because of how convenient it is. You don't have to worry about transportation, or if one of your kids has a temperature, or, you can do this all from home. So you don't have those kinds of cancellations and no-shows. So you have a higher productivity rate in your own practice, which, is a very good thing, because cancellations and no-shows can really kind of mess up, your plans for the day and how you plan to spend your time with clients. So it's more accessible into real life by providing telehealth services, which, we have a kind of evolve or devolved, if you look at that way, into a convenience culture. But nevertheless, I like it that more people have more accessibility to psychotherapy rather than less. And sometimes having to go to a therapist's office wasn't that easy for a lot of people, especially people that are less advantaged, have more disadvantaged, financially. So it makes things very accessible, which is a good thing. And of course, there is the telephone. If clients don't have internet, you actually can administer the measures orally. There are oral scripts that are in Spanish on the website. So if you wanted to, have a conversation and do the measure orally, you simply ask the client on a scale of 0 to 10 using decimals, how they see themselves, their personal well-being, and then you add it up and have the conversation that way. It does take a little bit longer, let me warn you about that, but I've done it that way many times. In fact, it's been validated that way as well, just so you know, that we validated it via telephone as well, and it is a reliable and valid measure of client distress and change in therapy. And of course, then after I administered it orally, I would record the score in Better Outcomes Now, or I would put it on a graph so that we could discuss the graph and their progress or lack thereof. So it can be done telephonically. It does take a little bit longer. The reason it takes a little bit longer is the clients tend to explain their rating on each scale, whereas they're looking at a measure and they're just putting, a mark or a point or a touch to where on the scale they see themselves. They don't discuss every scale, but when you ask them, they tend to want to, explain why they did their rating, which is not a bad thing. And just warning you, it takes, a little bit more time. So what I really like about it is, when COVID first hit and everything was locked down and no one could get to services anywhere, and you weren't allowed to even go out of your house, or maybe just to the grocery store, just, to a physician's office, it really let you do a triage of which clients needed service most. So agencies that I consult with immediately contacted their clients, either by internet, by phone, and administered the ORS, either, by Better Outcomes Now or by the phone, so that they could determine who needed the services the most, because, the ORS is a valid screener of distress. We have tested it that way. We validated it as a screener for distress, as well as validated as an outcome measure. So it quite can do that. It can let you know the level of services needed. One service we worked with had a mobile crisis unit, and so they could do a triage with the outcome rating scale and determine who needed to be seen face-to-face, even in spite of COVID, and who could wait or be done via telephone or the internet. So it can help you do those kinds of things. Because in less than 2 minutes, you know how the client views the distress in their life. The ORS, you can look at it as a measure of distress or a measure of well-being. Of course, it measures both, because one is the flip side of the other. As I mentioned to you earlier, The clinical cutoff is 25. The lower the score, the higher the distress. That young woman you saw me administer the measures to, she had an 8.8. She was in very, very high distress because of those crisis situations I mentioned to you. But anything under 25 is indicative of a person who is in enough distress generally to talk to a therapist. So obviously, if you're doing this as a screener, those that score under 25, you should prioritize for your therapeutic services. So it functions as a screener that way, can help us during COVID. And it also can help us as a follow-up. When you close people, one of the things that's really missing in psychotherapy research and practice is follow-up. And the reason is it's very hard to do, it's expensive, it takes time. Not many practices have the availability of somebody calling or contacting the client and finding out how they're doing 6 months or a year later. So it's the ORS is a solution to that because it takes so little time. You can do a follow-up ORS with someone in 5 minutes, either telephonically or by internet administration, because clients can log in to Better Outcomes Now and take the measure, and you have that. So you would have the follow-up. And what you could do is you do the follow-up and know whether the gains have been maintained since you closed the clients, but also it's a triage. It screens them if they've relapsed or not doing well, and you could invite them back into services if they're not doing well. So, you'd be finding out long-term follow-up data about your practice, about your organization, but it also is a way to just check in with clients and seeing how they're doing. We did this in our Norway trial. We did a 6-month follow-up, and it was very nice. I mean, it was the study was supported by the Norwegian government, so we could follow up with people. And again, I don't know how it is where you are, but in Norway, people tend to stay put. In the U.S., we have a much more transient population, and people tend to move around a lot. And sometimes people that are in poverty have to move around a lot. But in Norway, that's not the situation. So we got a very, very, very high follow-up rate. And of course, we found out that the gains of therapy were maintained at 6-month follow-up. And as I told you, at 6-month follow-up, there was a 46% less divorce rate, separation rate in the PCOMS condition. So these are some advantages of having a brief outcome measure. You can do follow-up with that, and you can do it via the internet or via the telephone. So Better Outcomes Now has total remote functionality, which was obviously very important. We had remote functionality before the pandemic, but when the pandemic hit, we revamped it so that it was total. Or in other words, everything that you can do face-to-face, you can now do remotely with clients in Better Outcomes Now. We made that change within a couple of months after COVID, after things were locked down, because we knew how important it would be for things going forward to still be able to provide services to people. And of course, now, as I mentioned, it is the new normal and will continue to be a very important way psychotherapy services are administered to clients. So there's some Zoom tips that I just want to kind of mention to you about doing it this way. We really view PCOMS as a collaborative intervention. So we like to be with them. I know it's very fashionable to give people the login information, let them take the measure before the session. But since the ORS only takes 20 to 30 seconds to take, we can do it real time with the client. So what I do, I have the client go to the login page, I ask them to share their screen, and then I walk them through the login process. We also have them calibrate their device so that the measure is exactly 10 centimeters. I walk them through this process. The whole thing takes about a minute. And so, after they take the measure, the graph comes up and we discuss their progress or lack thereof, and then I stop the sharing so we're back face-to-face during the session. If I want to refer back to the outcome rating scale, I share my screen and show it, and then I stop sharing so that we are back face-to-face again. Another way to do it is that you just share your screen from the very beginning with the client, and then you give the client mouse control to take the measure, and then it will come up on your screen, which is shared. You can discuss the progress or lack thereof, and then you can stop the share and go back to face-to-face. But it can work seamlessly once you do it a little bit, you know, once you get the flow of the process. First couple of times I did it, you know, I was clunky at it, you know, just the switching the screens and the, you know, getting the kind of feel of Zoom and how I would do PCOMS via Zoom. But, you know, after I did it a couple of times, it was just like a psychotherapy session always is for me, which is I'm comfortable with it. And there was a process we went through, and I found it to be quite easy to do. So, you know, that's basically you want to get as comfortable with telehealth as possible, because as I said, you're going to be doing it for a long time. So I wanted to, you know, show you an example of that. This is a Zoom client that I saw at the very beginning of the pandemic. I guess we're probably maybe 2 months into it at this point in time.
You notice in that information that I sent you that I like to ask clients to complete these 2 very, very brief forms. And we do that all online while we're here together on Zoom. And before we go any further, why don't you share your screen? It's at the very bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a green button there. And that way I can walk you through this process.
Okay. My glasses on.
And on the top right, click on Member Login. And the far right of the page, click on where it says Rater Login.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you the PIN and remote code now. So the PIN is 0165559.
Okay.
And the remote code, these are all uppercase letters. When I say a letter, it is M as in Mary, G as in girl, H as in Harry, Y as in yellow, T as in Tom, B as in boy, 1, 1. And then log in.
Okay.
Great. So on this measure that I'm going to be going over with you, it's called the outcome rating scale, and then later the session rating scale. It's based on how long the lines are on the scale, so we need to get it to be exactly right. So we have to do this one-time process of calibrating the device that you're using so that it's exactly 10 centimeters long. Do you have a ruler or a credit card with you?
Yes.
Great. So that third box down, click on where it says calibrate.
Okay.
And then where it says calibration method, choose which one you have there, the credit card or the centimeter ruler.
Okay.
And then your job is to get that bold blue line to be exactly 10 centimeters by using those plus and minus buttons below that line.
Okay. Whoops. Got a touch screen here, and it sort of complicated things a little bit.
Touch screens make things more complicated, no doubt about it.
Okay.
Very good. Save then. Great, and now we're ready to go. We won't have to do that again. So let me tell you a little bit about the outcome rating scale. I like to ask people to do this for 2 reasons. One is that it ensures that your perspective about whether or not you're benefiting from your service with me stays central to everything that we do. That's the main purpose of this. And secondly, it allows you and I to collaboratively monitor whether you're benefiting at each and every time, so that we know if you're not benefiting, we can put our heads together and figure out what else to do. So those are the purposes of doing the outcome rating scale. So that in that first box, click on that green ORS button there. Now, here's the scale. And so the idea is it looks at the major domains of your life, and it has you
rate how you're doing in each of these areas by putting a mark on the line, a touch or a click on the line that most approximates your experience, where marks to the left mean things aren't going very well, and marks to the right mean that things are going very well.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for doing that. And so it populates this graph. And the way this graph works is that people who score in the mauve or pink there tend to be people who are looking for a change in their life. And you definitely scored in that range of someone looking for something different. The green areas there, when people score there, it means their life is going pretty much okay, not great or anything, but okay. And they tend not to be people that wind up talking to people like me. Does that score of 19.4 and falling in the range of people looking for a change in their life, does that make sense to you? Does that fit your experience?
Yes.
Okay. The bold green line there that you see from your score is what we hope will happen if our work together is successful. And so we use that kind of just to check in each time to make sure that, you know, things are going the way we want them to go, so that we can change gears if they're not going that way. So, you know, you mark the individually scale the lowest. You can start there or start wherever you'd like.
What I've noticed is I've been getting more, I guess, anxious lately. I've been working at home for about 4 months now because of that COVID pandemic. And even though I don't mind being alone, I'm kind of an introvert. I was surprised how much I miss being able to get around people a little bit. I haven't been able to do that.
So at that point, it becomes, you know, business as usual being a therapist, right? So that was the process of introducing the measure. We had to go through that one-time calibration process, and I made note of his score, which was, you know, under the clinical cutoff in the mauve or area. I talked about the ETR, the expected treatment response, or what we hope the client will achieve if our work together is successful. And I asked him to, you know, start with the scale and mark the lowest, or start wherever he would like. And he started telling me about his increased anxiety since the pandemic. And we were, you know, off to the races, the way that any therapy session might go. And of course, the way my therapy sessions go is that after he told me about, you know, what he was struggling with, which was this increased anxiety and panic attacks, I asked him if that is what accounted for his low mark on that individual scale, so that we knew what that represented. We would see where gain was shown. And then I asked him if he, what it would take just to move that 1 mark 1 centimeter to the right. He had a good answer for that. So we had a target for what we were working on. And then, of course, I always like to ask clients if they have any ideas about how that can happen. This particular client didn't, and he was looking for some suggestions from me. So in the first 10 minutes of the session, I have quite a bit of information and can start talking about what possible intervention methods that we could use to help him with his anxiety. So one thing, that the last thing I want to mention here is that I kind of teased you early on. This also can help you accelerate your development. I made reference to it a couple of times when people aren't benefiting, allows you to do your very best work, because you'll be doing things for the first time. Oftentimes you'll be trying out new things you're learning about, or a suggestion from a colleague or a supervisor. It kind of gets you to step outside of your therapeutic business as usual. So that's one thing I really like about PCOMS, is by focusing and letting me know who's not benefiting, it really has me rethink what I'm doing and reflect more about what I can do differently when people aren't benefiting. And so I can have some different ideas ready to go the next time that I see them, because clients teach us with their responses about the benefit and fit of our services. And so they encourage me to step outside of my comfort zones, and by doing that, I become a better therapist. I learn more, I expand my skills, I expand my relational repertoire. So that's how we really can accelerate our development, by focusing on those people that aren't responding from us, learning from the people who do about what works, but also learning from people who don't respond by learning about what doesn't work, which motivates us to do different things with them, expand our repertoire, become better at the process. So this continual professional reflection is what therapist development researchers suggest on how we get better over the course of our careers. The English expression was we keep our development on the front burner, or we want to tend to it, right? So we need to harvest our client teachings. We need to, therapists truly believe the clients are the best teachers, but they don't go about it very systematically. So we want to tease out what clients tell us is working about our work, and of course, what is not working about our work, which encourages us to do things that are new and different than we've done before. So continue to reflect about your identity and evolve a description of your work. I know I've had the great opportunity of being able to do that over the course of my career because I've written a lot about therapy, and the way that I viewed my identity as a therapist when I started and the way that I view it now is actually quite a different thing. And it started by me just thinking about what is my identity, who am I as a therapist, what are the ideas that I really hold on to, and how do I describe what I do to others when they ask me about what it means to me to be a therapist. Just some ideas, some food for thought in terms of what I talked about today. And I hope you found some of the ideas useful to your practice, and now we will open it up to questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ahí está. Te dejo, Mercedes, perdón.
Oh, perfecto. Okay, so Barry, how are you? We have a question from the audience. The first question is, how are you thinking about the possibility of expanding and transmitting the PCOMS system to other countries and cultures?
Great question. Actually, we've been doing that since the very beginning. There are 20 countries implementing PCOMS across the globe.
Estamos haciendo esto, es una gran pregunta, y estamos haciendo esto desde el principio. Hay más de 20 países en todo el mundo que están aplicando el sistema. Go ahead.
And in fact, we have done randomized clinical trials in Europe as well as China.
Y hemos hecho ensayos clínicos aleatorizados tanto en Europa como en China. Ok, vamos a la pregunta 2. ¿Sí?
Vamos,
Sí.
pasamos.
Okay, question 2 is, have you been able to identify who is benefiting the most and who is benefiting maybe the least from telehealth? Or, yeah.
Yeah, great question. First of all, there has not been really any difference reported between telehealth and traditional psychotherapy.
Bien, también es una gran pregunta. En principio no hemos visto muchas diferencias entre lo que es la telesalud y lo que sería la psicoterapia más tradicional o hecha de forma más tradicional.
And now that we've moved to hybrid services where both telehealth and face-to-face services are offered, clients can be offered the choice about which they prefer.
Y ahora que estamos ya moviéndonos hacia un sistema más híbrido que combina lo que es la telesalud con lo que es la terapia cara a cara, los clientes están pudiendo elegir esto como una combinación de ambas o qué es lo que ellos prefieren también.
However, you can still, if you are tracking outcomes and collecting data, you can sort your data by different client populations and see who benefits more from which type of service.
Igual, si ustedes están como monitoreando o traqueando los resultados y recolectando datos, se puede como hacer una distribución de los clientes para ver qué es lo que le funciona mejor, o eso se puede como distribuir a partir de la evaluación de los resultados y la recolección de datos.
But I think that providing service based on client preference would be the best predictor of who benefits from which type of service.
Y entonces, ofrecer los servicios basados en la preferencia de los clientes sería lo que podría predecir mejor quién se está beneficiando más de cada uno de los sistemas, ¿no? Prestar siempre atención a lo que le funciona más, a lo que ellos dicen que les funciona más.
Ujú.
Ok.
Bueno,
¿Puedo hacer una aclaración? Quisiera agregar algo
Yes.
para la audiencia. Ay, me contestaste en inglés, Mercedes.
Perdón, se me mezcla.
No, fue muy divertido. Para la audiencia, para que sepan, el sistema de PCOMS en la página web que yo puse en el chat de YouTube, ustedes, el sistema, la página tiene una parte donde los profesionales se loguean y cargan los datos de todos sus pacientes. Entonces, para los profesionales es muy cómodo y muy fácil ir siguiendo cada tratamiento. O sea, realmente es un sistema de feedback porque nosotros prendemos la compu y tenemos todo el seguimiento de nuestros pacientes y ya sabemos quiénes están beneficiando o no. Quería agregar eso.
Perfecto. ¿Quieren que se lo traduzca o le
Sí,
traduzco
por
eso?
favor,
Sí.
porque así él
Okay.
sabe. Gracias.
So Valeria just wanted to add, to expand a bit on what you were saying to the audience, that the PCOMS system, if you see the webpage has a special login part for professionals, for practitioners, and for loading patient or client data. So it's really easy to follow up on, or to follow the treatment of each patient. So it's a system based on feedback with a very easy way of accessing all the information about your patients. She just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, very good.
Bien, vamos entonces con la tercera pregunta. So
Okay.
the third question that we had from the audience is, does PCOMS have specific adaptations or specific adapted measurement criteria for Argentina or other countries? Do you specify for different countries?
No, we don't. We translate directly the English measures, and so far we've seen very little cultural differences in the data we've collected from 20 different countries around the globe. There likely are some differences, but they've been so minimal, they've been virtually undetectable between cultures, the way that people approach the outcome rating scale.
Bien, en respuesta a esa pregunta, dice que no hacen adaptaciones específicas de las mediciones, sino que directamente traducen las medidas o, digamos, a las escalas de medición del inglés, pero lo que están viendo a partir de la recolección de datos de 20 países distintos, de la aplicación en 20 países distintos, son realmente muy pocas diferencias culturales. Se ven mínimas diferencias culturales y prácticamente indetectables en ese sentido.
And if you look at the measure itself, it makes sense that would be the case, because the measure covers the major areas of life that apply to all people's lives, regardless of culture.
Y si uno mira lo que son las mediciones mismas o lo que están midiendo, tiene sentido esto de que se está viendo poca diferencia entre culturas o entre países, porque lo que se está midiendo son cuestiones como propias de la vida, de las personas, grandes áreas, cuestiones de la vida en las que realmente sería muy difícil ver diferencias culturales. Ok.
¿Puedo agregar? Perdón.
Sí.
Me parece interesante agregar algo para el público que está vinculado con cierta idiosincrasia, ¿no?, de este tipo de mediciones. Son mediciones basadas en la construcción de realidad del cliente, de nuestro paciente. Son mediciones que están basadas en las prácticas colaborativas y en estar muy atento a la idiosincrasia del paciente. Entonces, las preguntas generales, en realidad el objetivo no es, el objetivo es llegar a que el paciente o el cliente con el que nosotros trabajamos nos diga a él si la cosa está funcionando o no. ¿Sí? Tiene un perfil mucho más construccionista y colaborativo.
Bien, le digo...
sí, gracias, Mercedes, muchas gracias.
No, por favor. Valeria wanted to add something in relation to these measurements. The measurements are based on understanding the client's or the patient's construction of reality. So the idea is to be very close to become very close to the idiosyncratic nature of this patient in particular. The ultimate aim is that the patient must tell us what is working for them, right? So in that sense, the measurements are much aligned with understanding that.
Absolutely, yes. They're, co-created based on the client's perspective of their lives, absolutely.
Exactamente, las mediciones están co-creadas, basadas precisamente en la perspectiva que tiene el cliente o paciente de su propia vida. Ok, vamos a la cuarta, entonces. And the fourth question is about the security, measures for protecting and guaranteeing confidentiality. So the question is, what degree of security does the system offer in order to guarantee patient confidentiality?
Very good question, and we take security quite seriously, and we allow no identifying information into Better Outcomes Now. Nothing that can be cross-referenced with another system.
Bien, también muy buena pregunta. Nos tomamos muy en serio el tema de la confidencialidad de los pacientes y no permitimos que haya ningún tipo de información que pueda identificar al paciente de ninguna manera, ni que se cruce con ningún otros datos, ni base de datos, ni nada. No hay información que pueda identificarlos de esa forma.
And we offer the same level of security as does a bank website.
Ofrecemos el mismo nivel de seguridad que tiene un sitio web de un banco, por ejemplo, en términos informáticos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And I think that there is a fifth question. Vamos a la quinta pregunta. The fifth question is PCOMS adapted for working with young children?
Yes, absolutely. We have adapted the adult measures for children. We did that way back in 2003. So there is a child outcome rating scale for 6 to 12-year-olds and a child session rating scale for 6 to 12-year-olds. And adolescents use the adult scales.
Bien, sí, hemos hecho la adaptación para niños en el año 2003. Entonces, tenemos hecha la adaptación para niños de 6 a 12 años, tanto de la escala de calificación de resultados como también de la calificación de la sesión, de esas dos instrumentos de medición, y los adolescentes utilizan las escalas de los adultos.
And you can download the measures in Spanish from the websites that has all of the measures in one packet, the adult and the child measures as well.
Bien, y se pueden también bajar, se pueden descargar de la página las mediciones, estos instrumentos de medición en español. Ahí se descarga por paquete, tanto las que corresponden a niños y las de adultos.
Y bueno.
Un último comentario vinculado a las preguntas, porque vengo siguiendo las preguntas del chat.
Just one last comment in relation to the questions, following up on the questions in the chat.
Un asistente está preguntando si el instrumento o las escalas se aplican en todas las entrevistas. Y lo que les quería transmitir es, nosotros tenemos en la cabeza esos instrumentos que le damos al paciente y el paciente contesta y queda ahí. Esto se construye toda la entrevista en función del trabajo con el paciente, con el instrumento. O sea, el instrumento es la gran herramienta nuestra en la entrevista, ¿sí? O sea, es una charla, no es te doy, entrego y el paciente devuelve. es una charla, ¿sí?
Digamos, hay que entenderlo como una conversación en la cual se está haciendo, simultáneamente se está organizando el proceso terapéutico, mientras se produce, emerge la evaluación, pero el resultado de cómo organizan terapeuta y paciente el proceso terapéutico. Es decir, es un organizador de la conversación, forma parte del tratamiento, digamos, es parte de la sesión, no es una cosa que va a ocurrir antes, va a ocurrir después, en realidad la sesión va a tomar la forma de cómo las escalas guían el diálogo.
Bien, le traduzco al doctor.
Sí.
So there was a question in the chat that was asking if the measurement instrument is applied in all of the interviews, and what Valeria was saying, and also Dr. Wainstein was saying, is that the instrument is actually an element that organizes the therapeutic session. Mm-hmm. It is not something that is like out of the session and that is delivered only initially. It organizes the whole session, and it is an instrument that sparks a conversation to organize the session. So, or not only sparks, I mean, is part of organizing this conversation that becomes the session. So it is embedded in the session. It is not something that is delivered externally or only a few moments and that's it. It's the instrument that organizes everything. I'm sorry, I think I hope you understood.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and I'm really glad you added that, because that's so spot on, because it's not the bookends to the session, it's embedded in part of the structure and process of the session. So thank you for adding that.
Bien, dice que sí, que eso que agregó Valeria es muy importante, porque claramente no es una cuestión externa, sino que el instrumento de medición está enraizado absolutamente en la sesión y la organiza como tal.
Bueno, dada la hora, porque la conferencia teníamos dispuesto creo que 1 hora, así que bueno, dada el horario, vamos a ir cerrando. Esperen que voy a mirar a ver, ahí está, quería chequear en el chat si alguien quería decir algo más. Les agradecemos a todos mucho por participar de la conferencia, esperamos que realmente la hayan encontrado útil. Ahora vamos a esperar que le traduzcan a Barry. Un agradecimiento especial a el doctor Barry Duncan, porque estamos trabajando en conjunto y la verdad que él esté presente acá con nosotros, para nosotros es realmente muy importante, así que quiero hacer este agradecimiento público para él. Así que bueno, están todos agradeciendo mucho la entrevista. Bueno, ahí está Mercedes, ahora te dejo vos.
Okay, so Dr. Barry Duncan, thank you very much. Valeria was saying thank you to everybody for their participation. Thank you for being here. And especially many thanks to you, Dr. Duncan, because we have been working together, but this is the opportunity to thank you publicly for your collaboration and for being here today, for being here and answering our questions and sharing your research and your work with us. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Yes, my pleasure to work with you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to spread my work and PCOMS work to your country, and I appreciate your efforts to do that.
Bueno, y muchísimas gracias a ustedes. Gracias por la oportunidad, gracias por la posibilidad de trabajar juntos y por la oportunidad también de difundir y hacer conocer el trabajo que estamos haciendo con PCOMS y la posibilidad de darlo a conocer y de poder hablar de esto.
Muy bien.
Gracias Mercedes.
Gracias Mercedes.
Y gracias a todo el equipo que está atrás de esta conferencia.
Ok, muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Bueno,
thank
you very much.
Bye.
Thank